Hey everyone, this is Shintai, and here with me I have my good friend, JerryTerrifying. What's up, man?
Oh, not too much, man.
Today we're going to be talking about Deus Ex, Human Revolution. Both of us played the PS3 version, although I'm sure the 360 version is pretty much the same. I think the PC version may be a little better though, but
Well, that's
yeah.
every game. The PC version's better just because you can tweak settings, download mods.
First, I want to talk about the visuals because some people complained about this game's visuals, and honestly, technically, it's not the best looking game. I thought that the art style in itself stood out more than the technical prowess of the game. What did you think?
I think they nailed the visual style. Some people like to nitpick and can't just accept something for what it is. That is its visual style. That's what that game looks like, and I enjoyed it. I didn't have any strong reactions one way or the other.
The only real thing I could think of was sometimes the animations for less important characters were a little bit choppy. Otherwise, visually, the game didn't really bother me. I thought it looked fine. One thing I really liked was kind of like the gold tint that the game had.
Black and gold, the
Yeah,
game.
yeah, very black and gold. And I kind of liked that. I thought it went well with the overall look of the game.
A little bit better than your standard games these days. The gritty, realistic shot in glorious gray and slightly less gray. Video games are so not colorful these days. It's nice to see a game at least having a color in it. That's a nice step back in the right direction.
It is nice. I think it makes for the game to look a little more visually unique.
It kind of had a film noir sort of style going to it. I think what they were going for with the black and gold. I enjoyed it visually. I think it's a visually appealing game. Nothing about this game struck me as being bad. Some of the gameplay elements, like real early on in the game, maybe the first 2 or 3 hours, I had to get acclimated to the game, and that may be jarring for some people, but once you get into the game, everything's really solid all around. Nothing jumps out at me as being like, oh, this is awful.
I think that the game, I don't know if it's fair to say that it doesn't make a good first impression because when you first play it, it's like, oh, this looks like it's going to be like a typical shooter kind of game because the very first part of the game is like very action oriented. But the more you play the game, you actually get the feeling it's like, oh, this is actually a stealth game.
For me, jumping into it, it just felt like something was off, like it's a little sloppy or unpolished. But as you get into the game and you understand how to play it and work the system, you're like, oh, this wasn't unpolished. I just didn't know what the hell I was doing. That's the impression I got. I don't know, that might have just been me. But it just felt like the first maybe 2 or 3 hours, just like not quite getting it. Then once I started stealthing everything, I really got into the game.
I felt that at some point things started clicking for me as well. I was just ghosting through the game. Honestly, some of the best parts of the game come from stealthing through areas, being able to get through places completely undetected, and you really feel like a boss when you do that.
I think it adds a little bit to the realism that if you jump into a room with 30 cyborgs, probably going to get your shit handed to you no matter how much of a cyborg you are. There's 30 more of them, you know? I think the game really wanted you to play stealthy, which kind of goes against why I like Western RPGs in that they let you go about anything any way you want. In Deus Ex Human Revolution, I definitely felt that I had to play it stealthy or I'm just going to get my ass handed to me.
Well, at the same time, while you did have to play it stealthy for the most part, the way that you could play the game, I still felt that it was pretty non-linear since there was a lot of branching paths and it allows you to develop different skills in different areas.
I'm not saying like an issue of being linear, it's just I think you have to play it stealthy. Like you can't just go in and rip everyone apart.
I think that's only like towards the end of the game when you get really powerful. Yeah. Towards the end of the game, I developed my character to the point where I had a bunch of points that I didn't even need anymore. He could just go through enemies pretty easily.
I think this is a game that really benefits from multiple playthroughs. Knowing what you want to do from early on in the game to build your character would be massively beneficial. So after you go through and you get a feel for what's going on, and then you can build your character exactly how you want that second time through, I think then I may have had a little more options with how I carried out most of my missions. But for the most part, it was, oh god, I got seen. I'm done. You know, for a long time, it was like that.
One thing that I found that was interesting about the game, I mentioned before, by the end of the game, your character gets really powerful. That's because this game isn't just a action stealth game, it's also somewhat of an RPG. When you level up, you get a praxis point, or if you find a praxis kit on the floor, you can use it to advance the main character's skills in different areas. You can make him run faster, jump higher, earn different moves, like you can get a stealth cloak, which is really useful. You can get a couple of seconds in, stealth cloak, and run through a room. That's another thing. You can get a skill that allows you to run quietly, which can also be really useful. It's really interesting because early on in the game, it's very imperative to you for you to think about, okay, what do I really need? What is the most important thing I need to level up or to advance in? Because it can really help you play through the game better. It can make or break you early on in
Yeah,
the game.
that's why I'm saying the second playthrough is probably where most people are going to get like most satisfaction out of the experience. And it's a good enough game to want to go through again immediately. I mean, I rented it. I beat it in like 2 days. Like I just marathoned through that thing and I absolutely loved it. The character customization and how you decide to level your dude up is very deep. It is good. And I believe we played the game way differently. I forget how I leveled my character up. You took advantage of a lot of the tech gadgets. I spent most of my time just pure stealthing, crawling through vents, sneaking around corners. Once I got my silenced pistol, it was on. Headshot, headshot, headshot.
The way I played the game was actually in the beginning of the game, I was very much only physical and I was really into like hacking computers and stuff. So I would almost never use any of my guns. I would like sneak up behind people, knock them out, and wait for my battery to recharge, and then I'd do the same to another guy. And it wasn't towards the end of the game where I had tons of ammo and I had the tranquilizer rifle and I had the taser and I think I had a few other weapons that were good for taking out enemies non-lethally, is when I stopped using the physical attacks and I started using more of that. And I also made use of the stealth cloak more. I also paid attention less to the hacking. I think it's kind of interesting that your gameplay style, like me, could shift as you're playing through the game depending on what you think is appropriate.
The only thing I really remember being a problem was ammo. I did use the hell out of that pistol, and you don't really run across, my memory serves me correctly, ammo was a little bit of an issue. You had to be really selective with your shots. Most of the time, if I could, I'd sneak around, but at the same time, man, me and that silenced pistol, we were a team. We got through that game together.
I think that's one of the good things about the game, though, that it doesn't just shove ammo in your face and you can just, blast whatever you want. It forces you to think about what you need to do and think, well, do I really need to use the gun, or can I just, like you said, just sneak around instead? It makes you think more about the situation. Before we end this off, what did you think of the story?
I think it's going to be more relevant coming up. I forget the name. There's this scientist, and he's talking about the convergence of technology. Eventually, he thinks humans are going to have embedded computers, and evolution's going to kick it into high gear once we start having cybernetic implants and shit. And he thinks it's going to be happening within his lifetime. So these are real life issues. And, nano computing and shit. There's a lot of cool science crap that's going on right now that before me and you die of old age, this may become more and more relevant. The element of having large corporations in control of this. Would you trust Microsoft with the remote access to your heart? Would you? Would you trust their software patches and firmware updates for your new electronic baboon heart? Hell no.
Well, at the same time, if you're gonna die and that's the only thing that can save you, got to think about that.
Of course, but we live in America. We don't have government implemented free healthcare for everyone. Do you think that robot heart's going to be expensive? I mean, keep in mind, an ambulance ride is going to cost you $700. That's just getting you there. And what happens if you miss payment? They're going to have a repo man come and take that shit? They're going to turn it off and say, oh, you don't like paying for it. Well, I don't like this thing being on. Let me flip the switch. Your account's been terminated.
Now, what I liked about the game, though, in terms of this issue of technology merging with people like this, is that the game was very unbiased in that it didn't really favor one side or the other, and it really left it up to you. I thought that was pretty mature.
It does bring up some questions that I think in maybe, say, 20 or 30 years are going to be a lot more relevant. It's cool to think about the moral and ethical implications of cybernetic, and genetic engineering and all that crap. There's one more important thing about the game that I think needs to be discussed. How'd you feel about the boss fights?
I think that was one of the low points in the game.
The two things people boo-hooed about the most was black and gold and the boss fights.
I heard that, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but that they outsourced the boss fights to another company.
Yeah, that's the thing I heard, that it was another team just sort of shoehorned them in there. I thought they were all right. The one with the anatomy dummies and then the guy's cybernetic body kind of looked like that. I really enjoyed that fight. Kind of reminded me of the Vulcan Raven fight with the grid-like maze that you were thrust into, and I really enjoyed that boss fight. The first boss fight was all right. I enjoyed it. The one against the girl was kind of, whatever. I mean, I could have gone either way with it, but I didn't. I didn't get the same jarring effect from these boss fights that a lot of people evidently did have.
I didn't really hate them or anything like that. I didn't think like all these boss fights suck, but I do think that compared to the rest of the game, I do think that the boss fights were weaker than the rest of the game, I felt, at least.
I think one of the chief criticisms I got was like, oh, you can't stealth and like one hit kill them. Well, I think the point is that these are also enhanced humans, that you're going on a head-to-head fight.
Cyborg fight.
Yeah, and that's pretty cool. I like boss fights, the challenges that pop up, and I think that's a good benchmark for how much of a badass your guy's gotten.
I agree on that point. I just felt that the boss fights could have been better. I don't really agree with the point like, oh, the whole game's been stealthy and then you have to be unstealthy, because Metal Gear's been doing that the entire time and everyone thinks those boss fights are fantastic.
People love Metal Gear because of the boss fights.
Anyways, let's wrap it up. In conclusion, Deus Ex Human Revolution, really great game. If you're interested in something new and different and not the same generic shooter that you've been shown so many times before, this is definitely one to pick up. It does things differently, it allows you to play the game in different ways, and it has a pretty good story that makes you think about it.
The game's probably got to be pretty affordable these days, right? I'm guessing this is around a $20 title.
Yeah.
This is something that I think everybody should play. Its merits as a game alone are worth playing. And you're right, it does have a story with a little bit of moral and ethical dilemma. You don't get a lot of that in video games. You don't get a lot of plot that matters. Like I said, in a few years, this is going to be a lot more relevant. Yeah, it's a good game. Go out and buy it, man.
Thanks for joining me, man. It's a pleasure to have you.
No probalo.
Take it easy, folks.